Hello, my name is Craig Teal. I'm the Director of Parkland Community Planning Services, and through this video I'll be giving you a walkthrough of the draft South Shore Area Structure Plan. The purpose of this video is to walk you through what the document says and allow you to understand fully what the intent of the draft plan is, so then you can provide your comments and input. It is a lengthy presentation. To help you with that, we will be pausing and inserting tabs in our video so you can jump from part to part. So please settle in and welcome to our tour of the draft South Area Structure Plan. So I am going to be scrolling through the document and talking about it page by page or section by section. And we'll be going through the screen and hopping back to the maps from time to time. For those that have downloaded the document, you will find all the maps that I'll be referring to at the very back. So first up, we're going to start with how the document is structured and created. It is written into three general parts, which I'll gradually be walking through and spending a bit more time on the concepts and the policies. First up, the introduction part of the plan talks about the purpose of the South Shore Area Structure Plan. It is meant to give more specific direction on land uses and the infrastructure that's needed to support the future development of the area in the portion of the south growth node that is located within the County of Stettler boundaries. You can see on the map, the future land use map concept, which we'll come back to several times during the presentation, the area that we're discussing. So it includes the lands that are generally north of Township Road 402, with Old McDonald's Resort on the far left in the west, extending pretty much all the way over to the west end of the summer village of White Sands, just north of Bayview Street in the east. So it does wrap around the two, or close to the two summer villages, goes around Roshan Sands, but does not include the lands that are within the two summer villages. The boundaries of the area that we're planning for are taken from the Buffalo Lake Area Intermunicipal Development Plan. The Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan is a overall plan that wraps around all of Buffalo Lake, that includes all five municipal partners in that decision-making of what should happen in that particular area. And some of the key concepts that I'll be discussing come directly from the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. That plan and the draft South Shore Area Structure Plan have to be read in concert, which is why we talk about that in the first opening sections of the introduction and purpose of the draft. So one plan may fill in more detail than the other, or cover off a policy or topic. Both plans must be consistent with one another, although we may find more specific detail in the South Shore Area Structure Plan and leave some other details to the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. Where the South Shore Area Structure Plan does not specifically cover a topic, all the policies of the Buffalo Lake IDP still apply. And the South Shore Area Structure Plan may provide more details, but cannot directly contradict the Buffalo Lake IDP. And you'll see hopefully that our draft is very much written to fall in line or follow the parameters outlined in that other broad Buffalo Lake IDP, which is the agreement between the various municipalities around the lake. So that's what you'll read in section 1.3 in the relationship to the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. This plan also has to be consistent with the County of Stettler Municipal Development Plan, although the Municipal Development Plan provides more broad general guidance on topics as opposed to specific geography, such as the area that we're looking at. So before launching into our walkthrough, I want to talk briefly about document structure and application. So the plan is written into three major pieces. Part A is background and context, which we won't spend a lot of time. It is available online for you to read. Part B talks about major concepts, and then Part C talks about policy statements and really forms the meat of the plan in terms of what's expected to happen in the area. The Part A is provided to give you a general sense of what was happening in the area and what the existing policies were at the time that the plan was being prepared. This section does not provide policy for the plan. It again just provides context for the reader. Part B provides a narrative explaining 6 major concepts that were taken from the Buffalo Lake IDP and must be covered off to maintain consistency and are used to build some of the policies that you see in the actual draft plan. Part C contains the actual policy statements. So this means these are the expectations that landowners are expected to take into account when they do more detailed plans for their individual properties if they're interested in moving ahead with development. So really that is the The most meaningful part of the document are those Part C policy statements and some of the maps that support those policy statements. Throughout the policy statements, there's keywords that we use, and they are shown on the screen now. The shall and must are the strongest worded policies, which means that that policy must be complied with. Should is that the policy is important, but on a case-by-case basis means that it may be modified or it may vary in terms of the degree of application. And may is, as it suggests, it's discretionary on a case-by-case basis, where the county may require someone to do something if it's applicable, or may not. Or other times may is used to indicate what a landowner may choose to do with their property, indicating that that is acceptable and allowed under the plan. At the back of the document, you will find all the plans that go with Part A, that numbered 1 through 7. And for Part B and Part C, the maps labeled A through D are the ones that tie into the narrative for the concepts and for the various policies. Finally, if there are terms that you're not familiar with, some terms are defined at the very back of the document in the form of a glossary. Okay, so Part A, plan context. In this section, you will find an explanation and guidance on the map of which area in particular with the policies of this plan will cover. It repeats some of the background that you'll find in the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. It updates some of the existing policies that apply to the area. It provides a brief summary, such as the role of the County of Stettler Municipal Development Plan. It looks at the current land use designations under the land use bylaw. So all of this, again, is context for the reader at the time that the plan was being prepared and written. Much of this background material got carried forward from the existing Buffalo Lake South Shore Intermunicipal Development Plan, which is a plan that the South Shore Area Structure Plan is meant to replace. So section 2.6 provides you a little bit more background about the physical nature of the area in terms of tree cover, expected wetlands or pocket ponds, sensitive areas that may have to be incorporated or retained as development occurs in the area. Recognizing that the area is fairly hummocky terrain, it's not nice and level, which creates its own challenges for future development and creates a series of environmentally sensitive areas that have to be taken into account as one is doing more detailed planning on each individual quarter section. Starting on map 7 in section 2.8, you'll find some information about existing infrastructure that the county has in the area, in terms of how close the regional water lines have progressed to the area and what kind of road system is in place at the time, again, that the plan is written. And 2.9 talks about the existing arrangements for water and wastewater arrangements with a series of largely private systems in place and communal systems with a fair amount of effluent being trucked over to the Red Willow sewage lagoon for interim treatment arrangements. And then through the rest of this section, it talks about the various neighborhoods that have already been developed in the area. And it's important to remember that we have existing development already on the ground, that it's not a blank slate that we get to start fresh across the board. So as I mentioned, a brief run through of Part A. Part B, the plan concepts. This section of the document starts talking about 6 major concepts that need a little bit more explanation so you can understand the context for the policies. So we're going to talk about land use, we're going to talk about the development unit allocation, we're going to talk about the future intended transportation network, the plan for maintaining lake access for visitors and residents of the area, and finally water servicing and wastewater servicing concepts. It's important to note that this is a very large area that we're dealing with, and full potential of what you're seeing in the plan will take many years to develop. It's not something that will be done in 3 or 4 years. It's probably going to be taking place over the next 25 to 30 years of time. What's going to drive the timing is really the interest in the landowners, each individual, on willingness to go ahead or desire to go ahead and developing their property, and what the economic influences at the time are, and how viable each individual project may be. So again, this is a long-term plan that may take some time to build out and develop. So while we talk about the land uses will take time to fill out, same kind of approach happens with some of the infrastructure that you're going to be seeing as on the various plans. So the roads will gradually expand and grow as needed as development progresses. similarly with the water and wastewater systems and other facilities that are needed to support the population. So it's important to remember that this is a gradual, the plan looks at the overall final big picture many years down the road, and then gradually over time, bits and parts will be filled in. To get there, there is an expectation that landowners will do more detailed planning based on the concepts of the area structure plan, and that will come up again in the policy section towards the end when you start hearing the expectation of landowners to do what's called a local area structure plan or an outline plan or a site plan. That is the more detailed level of planning that I may refer to as we go through the document, where those individuals are prepared to go ahead with their property development. Look to the South Shore Area Structure Plan for guidance. They also have to look to the Buffalo Lake IDP for guidance and prepare more detailed plans for the county's review and approval. So that this plan that we're going to be looking at, it very much sets the stage for that process and that expectation of those future developers of property. We'll also look at implementation items that the county will need to follow up on after the plan is put in place to make sure that the information is there for that detailed development by landowners to go ahead. This includes more detailed plans around the vehicle access points or the boat launches, what they will look like, and how they will be paid for or funded over time. There's also the same question about the confirmation of major infrastructure servicing options, figuring out what's going to happen with the sewage lagoon or treatment for this area long term, so that too can be taken into account as the initial or first developments come in under the South Shore Area Structure Plan. So the first major concept we're going to go through is the land use concept. So this is the activities that we would see on various parcels or various pieces of areas across the geography that we're doing the plan for. Up on the screen should be the future land use and transportation concept, or future land use concept map. So this graphically illustrates what activities would happen where. So first we start with in the far west or left part of the document. Old McDonald's is slated to be an area for recreational use. Recreational use is intended for things such as RV campgrounds or general campgrounds, commercial recreation facilities, or golf courses, those sort of uses and activities. Old McDonald's Resort is an existing activity on the ground, and there's also an expansion area set aside for them. The second area that's identified for recreational is, you can see that, is north of Bayview Street in the far east part of the plan, in the area identified as or known as the Paradise Shores site. So two locations are identified for that particular use. The yellow that you see on the land use concept is intended for future residential use. So that encompasses the existing residential areas such as Scenic Sands and Buffalo Sands. And for quarter sections that are currently used for agriculture, that communicates what the future intended allowable use would be. So residential in this context could be single detached dwellings, it could be duplexes, it could range up to small scale multifamily. It may be permanent residence, it may be seasonal residence. Throughout that area that you see as yellow, the intent is somewhere within that quarter section, a number of residential units would be created, preferably using a cluster design. So they would concentrate along the major roads and leave significant areas of open space, either as agriculture or as actual planned park or natural area, to give a sense of openness within each individual quarter section. The other land use that you see showing up relatively prominently on the drawing is the green areas, which are indicated as open space. So for the most part, these areas are lands that contain slopes that may or may not have tree cover on them, wetlands or pocket ponds due to hillocky terrain. So anything that has a slope of greater than 20%, generally speaking, is showing up in that green area at a very high level. Recognizing that when people do more detailed planning on these individual areas and start looking at specific contours, some of those lines may shift. But in general, the expectation is these areas that are shown in green will be either incorporated into the open space system or left in their natural state. Within that same category, we have two locations, one here on Range Road 21-1 and the other over here on Range Road 25, in between 25 and 2004. that are identified as community parks. So they are part of the open space using what's called municipal reserve to create a space for active recreation. So a relatively level and 10 to 12 acre parcel where the future community in this area would be able to have ball diamonds or open space recreation facilities. In the other areas where it's not necessarily as level, trails and other types of recreation can be provided. The other land use that you see on this map is commercial, which is the one red location that you could see here, just to the east of Highway 835. That is an existing designated commercial site, used, I think, predominantly for RVs or storage facilities right now. The fact that the map shows only one location does not mean that there won't be additional commercial in the area in the future. Any commercial that is proposed in the area is expected to have a bit of a lake or a tourism flavor in terms of providing a convenience type service to residents or visitors in the area, as opposed to a full-on commercial shopping district. So as developers come forward and propose detailed designs, there may be a small convenience store or a restaurant or a small commercial location identified within their overall plans. At this stage, we're not identifying those. They would be filled in at a more detailed stage of design. The final two additional land uses I'll point out are the dark green, which indicates the provincially owned right-of-way along the shore of Buffalo Lake. So that land is under provincial jurisdiction and control and has other policies that apply. The county approvals do not extend into that particular area. And finally, we have a public service location, which is the light blue over here in the east end of the plan area, which is a site the county has acquired for a satellite operation or a facility for the delivery of municipal services. So that could take the form of a public works yard or a substation for the fire hall or emergency services. The last item to note on the land use concept are the three asterisks in red, which all indicate the vehicle access points, also known as boat launches, that I'll talk a little bit further when we get into that particular concept. Okay, so that gives you a brief walkthrough of the land uses shown on the future land use map. They are also listed on the pages explaining the text a little bit more about what each of those land use categories mean in a little bit more detail. So the next major concept we're going to be going through deals with the development unit allocation concept. So the South Shore Area Structure Plan has to work within the overall arrangement between the 5 municipalities under the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. That means that there's a limit in the amount of development, called development units, that are allowed within the county's portion of the South Shore Growth Node. So this plan is consistent with the Buffalo Lake IDP in terms of its definition of development unit, and I'm going to jump to that in a second so you can see what it means. And then also follows how many units can be provided in this area. And then it's up to the county through the South Shore Area Structure Plan to decide how they wish to distribute or ration that number of allowable units under that broader plan with the partnering neighboring municipalities. Okay, so to start with, we need to understand the definition of development unit. So the text that I'm describing for you more or less comes from the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. And development unit is the term that's created for the Buffalo Lake IDP and this plan to basically define any type of use that creates an overnight accommodation or has potential to create an overnight accommodation. And those are the types of development units that are being rationed or restricted or limited within the Buffalo Lake IDP and this plan. So that includes any existing privately titled lot. So it doesn't include park space or environmental reserve. It includes any residential unit, so a single detached dwelling or a manufactured home that is above the parcel that it's already creating it. So initially the parcel counts as unit 1, and then you put a house on it and it still only counts as unit 1. If you put another residential unit on it, now it would count as 2 development units. So there's a bit of overlap in some of the terms and definitions that you can see on the screen. It does include any designated or developed campsites. That doesn't mean that the campsite has to be full. It has to be available for use. So if a 100-unit campsite or RV campground has been approved, that would count as 100 development units. It includes any hotel, motel, or lodge room. So if a small-scale Kananaskis-type resort was proposed that has 80 rooms, that would count as 80 development units. It also includes recreational vehicles that are on-site and intended for use for 31 consecutive days or more through a season. So family visiting for 3 days over a weekend does not count as a development unit, but if someone's there more long-term, then, or set up for use more long-term, then that recreational vehicle will count as a development unit. And finally, the definition specifically identifies secondary suites as part of the count as well. So having gone over the term development unit, we'll now go through the concept of how the allowable number of units assigned to the County of Stettler were distributed throughout the plan. So we take our lead from the Buffalo Lake IDP, and indicates that the county is allocated up to 2,969 development units within all of the growth node area that's within the county's boundaries. So that number has to take into account the existing development units based on the definition that we just looked at, and the future development units that may be allowed in the area. The plan also expects the IDP also expects the South Shore Area Structure Plan to maintain an overall average density across the entire area of 0.9 development units per gross acre. So that means when we look at all the development units within the area that we're doing the plan for, we have to also fall within that density calculation. That gives us a slightly different number when we compare the two approaches. The density number, based on the area that we're covering in the plan, comes in lower at 2,728 development units compared to the 2,969 indicated in another part of the Buffalo Lake IDP. Whenever we've encountered this as we drafted the plan, the South Shore Area Structure Plan has been based on the lower of the two numbers to maintain the most strict interpretation of the policies of the Buffalo Lake IDP and to stay within those parameters. There is another small discrepancy in terms of comparing the geographic area from one plan to another. So there's around 46 acres that seem to be accounted in different ways, which would influence the number of development units that are available. Again, the South Shore Area Structure Plan takes a conservative approach and always goes to the lower number. So that discrepancy may be worked out in time as development occurs, and it really is a function of different mapping tools used at different points in time. So for the purpose of the South Shore ASP, the total number of units that we're counting on for development in this draft version of the draft is 2,728 existing and future development units. So the next part of our calculation was looking at what's on the ground in terms of existing development in the area. And if you take a look at map B in the document, you will find that we've graphically shown what we found on the ground from county records and from a field verification undertaken in September of 2020. In summary, the existing units that we find on the ground by neighborhood are provided up on the screen. So for instance, there are 60 development units that are in Buffalo Lake Meadows. That could include, or does include, all of the lots that have been subdivided, whether or not the lot has been developed or not. And where we know that there's an RV that counts as a development unit in addition to a dwelling unit, we've tried to account for that as well. The Old McDonald Resort is the largest at 458 development units, which reflects the number of camping sites available within that existing development. All told, also individual quarter sections, so a large 160-acre quarter section with a single house farmstead on it also counts as an existing development unit. So there are a total of 904 development units already in place in the county portion of the South Shore Growth Node as of September of 2020. Next thing that we layered in was the consideration of existing approvals that have been granted. So this includes the concept plan for the expansion of Old McDonald's Resort, which was approved several years ago, which would allow for an additional 400 development units to be developed under that recreational use. So in all essence, when it comes to how much development units the county has to work with in the long term, those 400 units are spoken for. So when we crunch the numbers on that, looking at how many the county is allowed under the Buffalo Lake IDP and how many are on the ground, we end up subtracting around 1,304 development units from the 2,728 that we are allowed, which means that our area structure plan has to speak to policies allocating the remaining 1,424 development units. Before we can get to that point, we do have to take into account that development on the ground changes over time. So especially over the next 25 years, a landowner may choose to add a secondary suite, may choose to create a stall for an RV that's going to stay longer than 31 days. And those additional development units have to have some sort of allowance set aside for that kind of activity to happen. They won't take place through a large subdivision application. They may take place through individual development permits supplied to individual sites. So looking at the existing trend, it appears that approximately 10% of the existing properties have a tendency to go above that one development unit per parcel ratio. And we've created what's considered a holdback formula on how many of the 1,424 development units should be set aside to account for that in the future. And that's what this section of the document talks to. So that brings our total number down to 1,241 new development units in the form of new parcels being created or a large-scale development on a single parcel. So, for instance, a hotel which creates maybe 60 rooms would count as a multi-development unit proposal on an individual parcel, and talk about how those would be allocated across the geographic area of the plan. And so the map that's up on the screen identifies three, and the fourth that I'll speak to is the areas that are existing subdivisions that are not marked. So the first is allocation area A, which is marked as red over here in the far left part of the map, or west, around Old McDonald's Resort. The second is allocation area B, which is in blue, which largely extends from Old McDonald's Resort all the way over to Highway 835 and then up to the edges of the existing subdivisions towards the lake. The third allocation area C, are the lands that are east of Highway 835. So in this area, south of the Summer Village of Ocean Sands, and then extending along the shore south of Ocean Sands Heights, extending all the way over to the west edge of White Sands. The fourth area that doesn't have a marked area or is not identified is, again, the leftover or the residual areas that are already developed, being the existing subdivisions. So we do have to account for those as well in this conversation about allocation. The three areas that are been focused on specifically are the areas that we expect the new development to go. We've created a holdback for the existing areas that are already subdivided, and that's why we don't spend a lot of time talking about future development of those areas. In terms of the numbers assigned, allocation area A it has been assigned 458 existing development units and 400 for the planned expansion or approved expansion. So that brings the total to this area up to 858 allocation units. Allocation area B has been assigned a total number of 524. That includes 18 existing and 458 new future parcels that also would have that 10% of those parcels may have that second development unit on the individual parcels. So within this area, 524 development units would be expected to allowed to develop over the long term. Allocation area C encompasses the area to the east of 835, and that has been allocated 875 development units, so 12 existing from the individual parcels, and up to 783 new parcels, and then a 10% holdback for, again, going up to that second unit per parcel. So if it's all subdivision in this particular area, we would anticipate 783 country residential parcels. The remaining areas that don't have their marked allocation area, all the existing, accounts for the 458 development units. That includes 416 existing parcels and a 10% future holdback for some of those existing parcels to add another development unit, be it a secondary suite or a recreational suite. When you total up those numbers, you come up to 2,715 development units. That's an issue of rounding when we're talking about various fractions, which is slightly less than the 2,728 overall development units that we are basing the plan on. So we're still consistent with, we haven't exceeded the number that we were shooting for and still fall within the parameters of the Buffalo Lake IDP. So this section summarizes with the text, the net result of the allocation concept that we've been trying to achieve in the South Shore Area Structure Plan is summarized in points 1 through 6 up on the screen. So first, there's fewer developments than what is allocated or permissible under the Buffalo Lake IDP. The number of development units will allow the county to maintain that average density of 0.9 units per gross acre over the entire plan area. Within the plan, that density may have peaks or valleys, but globally will not exceed 0.9 units per gross acre. Existing parcels have some ability to add development units if they so choose. A future holdback accounts for that trend continuing as new parcels and new subdivision areas and new neighborhoods are created. The existing approval for expansion of the old McDonald's Resort that was given years before this plan was created is honored and taken into account. Finally, the number of development units on the east side and west side of Highway 835 is generally balanced, with 2/3 of the plan area being to the west of Highway 835. Approximately 2/3 of the development units, existing and future, are planned for that area, with about 1/3 of the plan area lying east of 835. Approximately 1/3 of the future and existing development units are planned for that area. It's not a perfect 1/3, 2/3 balance. There's a little bit of a skew or favoring of the lands to the east of 835, trying to take into account the desirability of those lands and the added infrastructure for roads that are needed to support development in that area. The Buffalo Lake IDP allocates 2,969 development units to the county portion of the South Shore growth node. The draft South Shore Area Structure Plan accounts for 2,715 of those development units. In the long term, the county still remains interested in the potential to develop the outstanding 254 development units. For the time being, the plan was based on the 2715, and as development progresses and takes place in the area, and monitoring of how many developments have been put on the ground takes place, periodic reviews of this area structure plan are also expected, and that will be an opportunity to come back and revisit what has happened with that 254 outstanding number of development units to be consistent with the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. An area structure plan is expected to look at or project how much population is expected to be in the area. So at the bottom of this section, we do talk about population projections. There are a lot of assumptions that go into figuring out how much population may be in the area, especially when you blend permanent and seasonal residential and recreational uses. Our first assumption is how many of those future development units may be permanent housing versus seasonal, such as the summer villages or recreational or activities. Assuming there's a 50-50 split, and based on the information for the county census from 2016, there could be 3,530 permanent residents residing in the area in the long term. On top of that, we may have a seasonal resident population of 4,000 to 5,500 additional persons, depending on how many people are associated with each individual campground and how long the camping season is and how you relate that to full-time population equivalents. The key point being for this area is that it's not a small population that could be occupying the area in the long term with all the activities shown on the land use concept built out. At any given point in time in a busy weekend in the summer, there could be upwards of 9,000 persons living or visiting the area using recreational facilities. Okay, so our third major concept is the transportation concept or road system that's intended long-term for the South Shore Area Structure Plan area. So this includes use of Highway 835 and the existing county range roads that are and township roads in the area, and adds to them future connections to create a grid in the form of additional arterial roads or additional collector and local roads. The future road system that's envisioned for the area is shown also on Map A, and of course so it shows future land uses in relationship to future transportation concepts. Township Road 42 is along the south boundary of the plan area. It is intended to retain its function as a major arterial road, and an arterial road is one that's meant to allow traffic to go from one part to another part, or to as a major access in and out of the area. It's not intended for local access to individual parcels, such as individual lots in scenic sands, but does provide local access to individual farmsteads or individual country residential parcels that may be subdivided off quarter sections. So it is considered the highest category of municipal road in the area in terms of function to move traffic and get people moving through the area. Highway 835, which is shown through the middle of the plan in the dark thick black line, is still available to access the area, but the plan does not call on any additional access points directly to it. This is largely a result of the nature of the highway once you crossed Township Road 442. And the terrain on either side drops off considerably. The highway itself goes up and down, so it's difficult to achieve a safe and functional access point on that section of Highway 835, which is why the plan has not counted on any additional access points there. Farther to the east, the arterial grid has two options. So Township 40-2 continues on, and there's the option for the extension of Range Road 20-4 south of 40-2 to connect down to Highway 601, or there's the option to extend Range Road 20-5 south of Bayview Drive, which is more or less where it ends right now, across Township Road 40-2, and then again south to Highway 601. One of these two options is intended to be put in place in the long term. Depending on the timing of development in the area to the east of 835, that's when the decision will have to be made on which of those two options is going to progress, with the intent of building up a solid grid of arterial roads coming off 601, which is well south of the area shown, to provide options to come into the area to the east from Highway 56 off to the east, Highway 835 to the west, and then up from 601 to the south. One of the core concepts in the transportation system that you're seeing is the ability to have more than one way to get into any particular area. So that includes the grid of arterial roads and how they connect to the highway system. And it also extends to the gray roads that you see shown on the concept, which are local or collector roads. So for most areas, there is always two ways in and out off an arterial road, going to another arterial road, or connecting up to the next neighborhood to continue on. So that at any point, if there is a disruption to a segment of road, there's an alternative means of directing traffic. That disruption could be from emergency, or it could be from a maintenance perspective. So there's a significant concept that's been built into the transportation network, is that idea of two ways in and out for most of the area to the highest degree possible. In some cases, that means our intersection spacing, such as this 800-meter stretch along Township Road 40-2, may not be ideal compared to the county's normal standards for intersection spacing, and the plan calls for basically a break to be given to that, to be able to achieve that overall objective of two ways in and out. So there's a little bit of a trade-off between county policies associated with that, the desire to have good intersection spacing, but also the desire to have those secondary routes in and out. Additional roads may be added to the ones that you see shown on the concept as individual landowners do their more detailed designs for their quarter section. So for example, the owner, this particular quarter section, the Northwest 13, the concept shows the need to provide a corridor out to the east to their neighbor to tie in and connect. And then what it doesn't show are the local roads that would service or come off that collector road to provide access to the individual lots and parcels. And that level of detail is expected to be filled in when developers or landowners do outline plans or local area structure plans. Okay, so the final part of the transportation concept are the orange dashed lines, the little dotted lines that you can see going through the map. Those are intended to show major trails and pathway alignments. So much like we're the road connectivity, we're trying to look for that future regional trail system that may benefit the 9,000 residents in the area. And as developers prepare the concepts for their individual quarter sections or parcels, the expectation is that they try to facilitate some sort of trail or path system based on the concepts that you're seeing shown on map A, to provide that opportunity to connect those trails from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, and ultimately tying up to the trails along the lakeshore. So the fourth concept that the plan takes into account is the lake access plan. The lake access plan requirement comes from the Buffalo Lake IDP and expects growth node plans that are prepared to communicate how facilities like vehicle access points, or again, boat launches, may be expanded as the demand for their use increases as development and growth in the area increase. So this part relates the 3 locations that I'll point out in a second that the county would focus their efforts on to account for the increased demand from 2,715 existing and future development units as development in this area progresses. Like other infrastructure, the boat launches are expected to grow over time as the demand and as the population in the area increases and grows. But there is a relationship between the pace of growth and development occurring and how quickly these facilities have to be designed and built. So the 3 areas that the county the plan focuses the county's efforts on are identified on the map A, future land use and transportation concept, with the red asterisk points labeled vehicular access points to the lake. So they include the boat launch in the scenic sands area in the far west, the north end of Range Road 21-1 up near Buffalo Lake Meadows, and the existing Buffalo View Estates Marina over here in the east part of the plan area. Other boat launches still exist in the area. They are shown on other maps. These 3 are highlighted here to be as the focus of the county's efforts for future expansion and development to accommodate the future population that was in the county portion of the South Shore growth node. For those 3 locations, the degree of existing facilities vary. Some have, such as Buffalo View Estates, have at least a ramp and a marina to work with as a starting point. Others may only have an area for a future parking lot. In all 3 cases, more design work is needed to identify what is ultimately to be built in the future, that the county then could use to schedule and plan for their improvements, and as developments come forward, determine when those improvements have to be made and how much the developments themselves are expected to contribute to the cost of providing these facilities. It is expected that concentration on these 3 areas will add sufficient capacity to serve the residents and visitors in the county portion, and all users, be it from the broader public outside the plan area or the 2 summer villages or other parts of the county, will be able to use these 3 boat launches and vehicle access points in addition to the other public access points at the Roshan Sands Marina, the Roshan Sands Provincial Park, and the White Sands boat launch. In terms of the concept, there is an expectation that the county will have to get a little bit of head start in terms of preliminary design work on the new and expanded facilities to understand what they would look like and what would be involved. And that again is to then move on to step 2, which is shown on the screen, to understand the funding mechanism and how much that would be, how much development would be expected to contribute. The county also has some funds that they could assign to the improvements of this area as well, which is spoken to in the plan. And the expectation then is that, just like the roads, as the need for additional boat launch or vehicle access infrastructure is demonstrated or anticipated or timely, that these improvements will be made so that it's there for the use of the future users. So concept number 5 involves water servicing. So the map D shows a combination of water and wastewater servicing concepts. So first we're going to go over the water, and then we'll continue talking on map D about the wastewater. So this document has been updated to reflect the creation of the regional line, which is shown on the far left-hand side of the document in the east, right-hand side, where you see the regional water line coming up from the town of Stettler from the south and over to the fill station that's been installed in the south end of the summer village of White Sands. So that is where the existing water system to service the area stops currently. And from that point, the concept shows a future extension of a supply line, which is the dashed blue line that my mouse is following right now, largely paralleling the shoreline, south side of Bayview Street, and into the summer village of Roshan Sands. Somewhere within the summer village of Roshan Sands, an additional water fill or reservoir station is expected to be built. This plan does not identify the location for that. It will be identified through a more detailed design for that facilities between the Shirley McClellan Commission and the summer village of Roshan Sands. Once from that location that's selected, the water line is expected to come back out of Roshan Sands and then follow more or less the road system to make its way farther to the west, to reach the cistern located at Buffalo Sands, which is basically what's shown here. So that what's shown on the drawing is the major spine or concept of a trunk water system tying into existing reservoirs in Buffalo Sands and Roshan Sands Heights as we go. And from that system, the expectation is that a local distribution system would be expanded as new subdivisions are provided or created. So again, if this developer in this location that I'm circling here wish to go ahead with their design for a subdivision, they'd be expected to pull the water line in, if that water line was close, to tie in their subdivision at the time. If the water line is not in place, they would expect it to do exactly what Buffalo Sands and Buffalo Lake Meadows did, Buffalo Sands did, in terms of creating a communal water system so that one day they can tie in and connect to that regional water system. We'll talk more about water expectations when we get into the policy sections. So the final concept in Part B of the plan talks about wastewater servicing, and it again goes back to Map D, and this time we'll be looking at the items that are shown in red on this drawing. Currently there are two communal locations, one at Buffalo View Estates and another at Buffalo Sands, where we have large holding tanks that collect the effluent from those existing subdivisions, and that effluent is trucked over to the Red Willow sewage lagoon for treatment at this point in time. The overall concept for the wastewater collection system is to create a series of pump stations, typically at the lowest points in the plan area, that would pump effluent from subdivisions that are tied into it into a trunk line that you can see shown as the red dashed lines going down some of the range roads, ultimately towards the southwest corner of the plan area to a couple options for the location of a wastewater treatment facility. That wastewater treatment facility may include a physical treatment or mechanical treatment plant, a lagoon, or a chemical or biological treatment. There's two location options that are identified. A choice has not been made between which option would be selected at this point. This is definitely an area that requires additional engineering and follow-up on the county once the area structure plan has been put in place, again, so that the cost of providing the system could be taken into account and passed forward to development as development comes online. Also, from each of those two locations for the wastewater treatment facilities, there's options on how the effluent would be directed ultimately to the Red River, either via Tail Creek or via a pipeline to the Red Deer River. Ultimately, the intent of the concept is to manage effluent from wastewater systems so that it doesn't go into Buffalo Lake. Okay, so the next section we're going to walk through is Part C, the plan policies. Just a quick recap, Part A and Part B are about context to help understand the concepts and the background that went into creating the South Shore Area Structure Plan. And Part C are the policies and expectations that really form the crux of the plan. So these are the things that landowners may account on for their property, that they could do on their property, or if they choose to go ahead and develop their property, this section sets out the expectations for those development proposals. We're going to go topic by topic. Some of the concepts that we talked about will overlap with some of the multiple topic areas, and we'll just touch on those briefly as we go. So first up, the document is structured to have general policies that are applicable across all of the land use categories. So these are topics that are important things that have to be taken into account, whether or not it's a recreational area or a residential area. When you're looking at the policies just in terms of overall structure, I will point out that on the far left, you'll see some text in italics. That is intended to help the reader navigate through the various policies. That itself is not policy. Everything on the right-hand side, after the policy number, that's the actual policy statement. So that's the one that really counts. So it's just to help you navigate and find various themes and topics throughout. So the first set of policies deal with environmentally sensitive lands and wetlands across all of the land uses, and the general expectation that what happens with those kind of features is subject to Alberta Environment Park's expectations. In some cases, it may be a wetland which may not be able to be filled in. In other cases, it may be a wetland that can be filled in, subject to compensation being paid. In some cases, the steep slopes may qualify as environmental reserve and have tree cover and really should be left alone or worked around. And in all cases, the general expectation is that there's an effort to work with the terrain or work with the topography as opposed to stripping and grading the entire quarter section and flattening everything and try to maintain that existing natural topography and functions that you see on the ground. So similarly, policy 4.3 or 4.1.3 talks about expectations against the provincial-owned lake right-of-way. So depending on where you are developing, you may find additional policies and expectations. The next set of policies talk about general expectations about views and impacts and maintaining the overall appearance of shoreline from the perspective of a person out on the lake. And then finally, the layout and design in this section talks about working again with natural lay of the land and trying to design subdivisions and developments in the future that prevent stripping and grading activity to the greatest extent possible. The general policies also touch on historical and archaeological resources, so that is some follow-up information. When we're along the shores of a lake, we do have reason to believe that there may be some archaeological or cultural resources that may be encountered. So that could take the form of a historical resource impact assessment prior to development occurring, or if something is found during construction, a pause and recording and following of the expectations of Alberta culture and tourism. The next section, 4.2, deals with land uses, and it breaks it out into the various categories. So starting first with agriculture. While agriculture is not shown on map A, agriculture is still a use that will occur across the land. Map A concentrates on what's future allowable uses, but some property owners may choose not to transition from agricultural use to residential use. And that's perfectly okay. That's what the section of agricultural use policies tries to address. Similarly to the existing plan in the Buffalo Lake IDP, there is a limitation on confined feeding operations in the area. New confined feeding operations will not be supported, and any expansion greater than 50% of present capacity will also not be supported. And that's a deal with the potential conflict between residential and recreational use and that particular form of agricultural use. Our residential use policies are next. So first up, it's intended to be directed to the areas shown on map A. When residential areas are designed, it's expected that they follow a cluster pattern type approach for new subdivisions. So that includes not necessarily filling the entire quarter section equally with a whole bunch of lots, but based on the need to provide communal water and wastewater services, perhaps the number of lots the person wishes to create or get focused on one half of the quarter section, leaving the other half of the quarter section for either small-scale agriculture or open space areas. The policy 4.28 is definitely a change from the previous plan in that it puts in place a minimum parcel size that is different than what's been allowed in the area historically. So the minimum parcel size for new residential subdivisions is expected to be half an acre, and the minimum width is expected to be 82 feet. So that means that future subdivisions are expected to look more like scenic sands than buffalo sands. They're still expected to use communal water and wastewater, but the expectation is not to create that full urban sense of streetscape when you go down it, and there's a little bit of space between the individual dwelling units. Commercial use is allowed in the plan area. There's only one location identified at this point, but there could be others. And this policy also identifies the general intent of what kinds of commercial we're expecting to see. So that could be small-scale retail and personal services, like a hair salon. It could be hospitality services, such as restaurants or food services, or a lounge. It could be marine or recreational vehicle-oriented equipment and sales. The general theme is that it relates to what the needs are for the population living or temporarily residing or visiting near the lake, as opposed to full-scale urban range of commercial uses. Home-based businesses are also a form of commercial use that the plan touches on. So that does not have to be lake-related. So that could include an accounting office if someone wants to work out of their home near the lake remotely. Those kind of activities are allowed, subject to obtaining the necessary permits from the county. Where commercial development is added, is expectation is tries to fit in with the residential character, if that's what the neighboring landowner or land use is, and tries to provide some sort of berming and landscaping to maintain or deal with any land use conflicts, or just maintain the same aesthetics and attractiveness. Recreational use of land is slated for 2 locations so far, and in the future, if a property owner wishes to come forward to identify an alternative location, that's a possibility. It would trigger a need for a formal plan amendment. At this stage, it's difficult for us to guess where alternative recreational proposals may be located. Recreational uses in the area are expected to have some relationship to tourism and the lake functions, but that can include picnic areas, beaches, amusement and game facilities, sports fields, campgrounds, interpretive centers, tourist accommodation, a range of golf courses and driving ranges, and similar outdoor recreational facilities. Public service use is right now identified to the 1 location as well. And what's allowed in that particular category are those things that support the delivery of municipal services to the existing properties and to the future residents of the area. So that could include satellite functions from the county, administrative facilities, facilities for emergency or protective services, or it could be a yard for parks and public works or utilities to operate out of. The open space category brings on a whole series of policies in terms of areas that are intended to be left in a natural state and areas that are purposely planned to form a recreational or park-like type function. So for those areas that are to be left in their natural state, that includes anything that is a wetland that is intended to be preserved, anything that seems to contribute to wildlife habitat, any area that has steep slopes greater than 20%, significant tree cover. So those areas are expected to be left natural or incorporated into the design to be left as part of the planned open space. Some will qualify as environmental reserve if they are close to a permanent water body or a wetland or steep slopes. Others, if they're developable land, they may be dedicated as municipal reserve as part of the normal 10% dedication when land is subdivided. That's how the county obtains park space, and this plan does call for the full use of the 10% that is available to the county for that purpose. The plan also speaks to voluntary dedications of some of these lands. So there are lands that a developer just may choose to dedicate as open space to create a certain ambience or feel about their potential subdivision. Some specific policies when you're adjacent to the lake for a 30-meter wide environmental reserve have been carried forward from the Buffalo Lake IDP. There's only 1 or 2 locations currently left that would qualify for this. However, if the subdivision development occurs there, that expectation is that there's that environmental reserve buffer from the provincially owned right-of-way. And specific to the 2 community parks, if those basically in both cases, they straddle a quarter section line, which means that there will be a dedication or a contribution from 2 property owners to create the overall site. And for those particular locations, the priority for where the municipal reserve or the parkland should be used or dedicated goes first to those particular sites. Okay, so our next set of policies deal with development unit allocation and the question of density. So again, this builds on the concept. This is where we find the full definition of development units is being adopted as a policy, and the definition is consistent with what's available in the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. The second policy identifies the 2,715 development units that are being purposely allocated at this point in time. And then the next policy goes to the various allocation areas that we see on map C, for the allocation, how much is allowed in allocation area A, the red area, or allocation B, the blue area, or allocation C, the yellowish area. And so it indicates the specific numbers for each of those areas. Policy 4.3.7 also speaks to how those development allocations will be further allocated within each area. And the policy is basically on a first proposed, first approved basis. So if an individual property owner comes forward before their neighbors, their proposal will be evaluated in terms of meeting all the policies of the South Shore Area Structure Plan, and the question will be how many development units are being approved as part of that proposal. And part of the calculation or consideration will also be how many units are being left for future landowners for when they choose, if they choose to come forward and develop their property. So the plan purposely does not identify or break down on a quarter section by quarter section basis how many development units are available for a particular landowner. The expectation is if you're interested, the county will deal with landowners on a first proposed, first approved basis. Policy 4.3.8 speaks to the question of density, and density is being managed across the entire plan area, so globally over the 3,000 plus acres that are involved, with the intent of maintaining an overall density of 0.9 development units per gross acre. That means some of the areas, one quarter section may be higher density, one quarter section may be lower than that average density. But when you average it across the entire area, that 0.9 development units per gross acre will be achieved. There's a further policy talking about how many of the development units available should go to permanent homes or in the form of detached dwellings versus available for commercial accommodation units or recreational campgrounds. And this policy suggests that at least half of the development units, new development units to come on between allocation area B and allocation area C as a combined pool of 1,399 new units. So should be allocated for detached dwellings. So in the form of subdivisions and housing similar to what we see in scenic sands. So that means approximately 50% of that 700 units out of that 1,399 should be devoted to detached dwellings. That is a decision the county council would be able to make as individual projects are brought forward. Finally, this section concludes with the need for having a monitoring system in place. And that's where policy 4.3.10 comes in, tracking and keeping understanding of where development is at in terms of the number of development units that exist on the ground or have been approved and just maybe haven't been built yet, is something that the county will have to track and monitor over time. So county staff will have to create a system to do that. In addition, the results of that system are expected to come to county council prior to their approval of any other new development that would add, say, 50 or more development units. So if a subdivision's coming in for 75 new parcels, then that's a point in time when county council should be presented with an update on how many existing units are in the area and where does the overall area stand relative to the 2,715 development units that are available. Okay, so our next section deals with lake access plan policies. So this is the more specifics about how the county will manage the 3 vehicular access points that are shown on map A. So first up identifies location. Second identifies that the county needs to prepare detailed designs for each expanded facility. Look at the timing. And that too should be, the first one should be ready for the first development that creates 50 or more new development units. So that could be in the west end of the plan area, or it could be in the east end of the plan area. So the boat launch or vehicle access point that's being created should correspond roughly to which part of the plan area where those development proposals are coming in. The overall intent is to make sure that the plan for the improvement of those facilities is in place before the actual developments themselves. And then ultimately the improvements that are needed, the new boat launch, new parking facilities, or whatever is identified, is also built at the same time that the development is being created and is ready for use pretty much at the same time that the new development is coming online. So those are the general gist of the timing of policies that you find in that particular section. Our next section deals with transportation policies, and it starts with the expectation that generally the planning for future roads follows the concepts that are shown on Map A. Recognizing though that there is some latitude, so if a road has to be moved over 10 meters or so when the detailed design and detailed planning is being undertaken, so long as there's consistency with the overall concept, those kind of shifts and adjustments can occur. So for example, it would not be acceptable to take away the secondary access route to a neighbor as one property owner is doing their design. That would be too far of a deviation from the expectations and concepts. So starting with Highway 835, we indicate that there's no desire for additional access points or intersections along that section, although we still have to deal with the intersection of Township Road 40-2 and 835 as a key point where a lot of traffic into and out of the area will move through. We talked earlier about the concepts for range roads 204 and 205. And as development to the east part of the plan area occurs, a decision will have to be made on which of those two routes, only one of them will be selected, will be the best option to serve the long-term needs of the area. Similar to the boat launch question, there's also the issue of figuring out the timing and the cost, and then the contributions towards the provision of those new roads. There's some specific policies talking about what's often referred to as the Boland Road, which is, just bring it up and show you on Map A, which is a privately built road that extends through the summer village of Roshan Sands and into lands in the county. So the portion in Roshan Sands is just within the grayed out area that you can see on Map A. It extends, generally speaking, in an east-west fashion and ties into 835 on the west side. In dash blue and then in gray, you see the other portion of the private road that's in the southeast of section 19. This road, portions of this road may be acceptable for the long-term development of the southeast of 19, provided that those sections that are going to be used are meeting a county road standard. And the long-term future of whether or not Boland Road is available for a connection all the way out to 835 really depends on the coordination between the summer village of Roshan Sands and the county on whether or not there's a willingness to let that route continue on, or whether or not it has to be dead-ended to separate traffic. This policy section also recognizes that on the map we show one particular area of roads that are needed to serve the plan area, but there are other roads and intersections beyond that traffic impact assessments and studies may have to take into account when they're looking at a significant new development of this area. That can include intersections of 835 and Highway 601, Highway 601 and Highway 56. So there is a list there for that traffic analysis to look beyond the plan area and to make sure the road system leading up to the plan area is able to support the development. Access roads, just to clarify that the intent is to provide our arterial roads are meant to move traffic more or less, as opposed to providing access to individual driveways. Individual driveways come off for the future local and collector roads. And as mentioned earlier, as detailed plans are prepared, it is expected that more local and collector roads may be added depending on the design and layout of that subdivision. Intersection spacing is one area where we anticipate that the county standards, the typical design standards and guidelines for roads may have to give a little bit, and that's been articulated as a policy, so a conscious choice. So some of the locations that you can see where that may come into account are here along Range Road, Township Road 40-2, where we have 2 intersections to provide the 2 ways in and out for this half section area. So 2 access points within an 800-meter stretch, and some other areas where we may be less than a 600-meter spacing. So all other aspects of the design and construction standards for the county are expected to comply when developers prepare their detailed plans. So that means roads have to be built to the proper width construction standard to meet the county's expectations. And finally, the policy is again tying back to the environmental policies. When designing the roads, the desire is to work with the existing topography as much as we can. However, sometimes there may be a need to do a cut and fill area to be able to provide that secondary access down the slope. And there's some that is clearly articulated in the policy as well. Our next section comes into water servicing policies. So this also relates to map D that's found in the back of the plan. And the expectation is that that overall concept is what gets worked towards. And then in terms of individual property owners developing their areas, depending on how far the regional water line and fill stations and reservoirs have progressed, a person doing a multi-lot subdivision, which is anything more than 2 lots, will be expected to provide a communal water system that can be tied into the regional water system at a future date. If a proposed development is within 800 meters of one of the water fill systems that already exists, then the expectation is that 800-meter distance be closed by a service line, and they tie in pretty much at the time that they're building their development. The rules for individual parcels, so if you're a farmstead on an agricultural parcel, or you're a country residential parcel being created and that's the extent of the subdivision or development, are different. They are not expected to provide a collective water system. They can continue to use individual water wells. At some future date, when water wells are being phased out, or they just reach the point where it's time to invest, if the water line is close and accessible, those property owners may be able to choose to connect if there's a local distribution water line that they can access. As part of the outline plan and local area structure plan preparation, if there is a communal water well that's going to be used as a short term because a regional line is not available to be accessed, the county will require water supply reports to make sure that the groundwater is available to supply the proposed development without detracting from other groundwater users. Okay, so our next section is wastewater servicing policies. Similar to the water, as regional systems become available, there is an expectation that there will be a connection, or for new subdivisions. For existing services, there may be a transition period for that. The expectation for a new subdivision will be the creation or the use of communal collection and holding tank, similar to Buffalo Sands and Buffalo View Estates, until such time as the overall regional wastewater system is available. In terms of relationship to the lake, the overall effort is to make sure that treated and untreated wastewater effluent does not make its way into Buffalo Lake, either through surface overland flow or through infiltration into the groundwater system. That means the area structure plan has carried forward the policy from the Buffalo Lake IDP related to private systems that are within 800 meters of the outside edge of the provincial-owned right-of-way, or within 800 meters of the lake shore, that private systems in those particular cases should be using holding tanks as opposed to field systems. Gradually over time, any existing field systems that may be out there, when it comes time to update those, and if the regional system isn't available, will be expected to switch out to a holding tank to meet that expectation. The design and construction standards are also laid out. The expectation is that all communal wastewater collection systems are designed to meet both the county's expectations and Alberta Environment and Parks expectations, who is the provincial regulator of municipal systems such as this. And again, for use of individual private systems, for say a farmstead or an agricultural parcel, or a new country parcel or residential parcel that's 2 acres in size, there is provision to allow that to continue without connecting on to the regional system. And that's also what the last two policies in this section speak to, that transition. Single parcels that are not part of a multi-lot subdivision or development on a parcel that is designated agriculture can continue to use private individual wastewater systems. So in some areas that may include use of a field if you're more than 800 meters away from the lake shore. If you're within 800 meters of the lake shore, you can have the private individual wastewater system, but the expectation is that it would be a holding tank. So our next section of policies deal with stormwater management. As development is proposed and subdivisions are created, there is a requirement that the developer of that project take into account how much extra water will be coming off the quarter section, and to detain the water so we don't flood downstream landowners or water bodies, and also that we manage the water quality so that any contaminants that are coming off roadways or driveways are treated before leaving the quarter section, and that is what protects the water quality of Buffalo Lake ultimately. We're part of the system that helps protect the water quality. The stormwater management facilities must be planned to meet both the county's expectations and Alberta Environment and Parks requirements. In some cases, this may be tied into wetlands that are being preserved, or maybe stormwater management systems or facilities may expand the sense of open space within the neighborhood or within the subdivision being created. And the rest of the policies speak to all the expectations that would go into a stormwater management plan that has to be submitted at the time that a subdivision or development is being proposed, or as part of the outline plan or area structure plan. Finally, other municipal private services such as overhead power, electrical power, natural gas, telecommunications. Some of these are directly regulated or influenced by the county, others are not. So the expectation is that anything that, where possible, goes underground within new subdivisions. So once you get into the subdivision area itself, the telecommunications and electrical facilities will be buried within the road allowances. Overhead power that exists going down the township roads and range roads may continue on for many years, but the expectation is new development would make use of underground wherever possible. So our next section of policies talk about how to implement, and what this section really lays out are the expectations of a developer or landowner who wishes to come forward and start the development process for their land. So the previous parts of the plan provide all the concepts and the expectations in terms of land uses, road design, the expectations for storm ponds, how water and wastewater are to be managed and designed. And this section starts talking about the exact tools and studies that are expected to be created and presented to the county for the review and approval before a land use bylaw designation is approved that would allow the subdivision or the development to proceed. So there is a fair amount of work that goes into these. In comparison to the level of detail that we have for the area structure plan, these plans are expected to put in a lot more effort and to focus in on a much smaller area. And that's why the concepts of the South Area Structure Plan try to take into account a little bit of flexibility for this more detailed level of work that will occur at a later date when developers and landowners are ready. So there's a little bit of latitude, but there's also expectations broadly that must be satisfied as these plans are prepared. So for the multi-lot subdivision, and when creating, say, a 3 to 4 or 5 or more parcel subdivision, they would provide a local area structure plan or an outline plan. Policy 4.10.3 talks about the detail that is expected, so that includes more detail about the types of land uses. Maybe there is that small-scale commercial in one part of the area. Maybe there's different types of housing in different areas. It talks about the parcel sizes, how much population and what the density of the development would be, how many development units have been used, how the water and wastewater and storm management concepts will be provided, where the open space is located, what areas are natural that will be retained, all of the items that you can see listed on there that are typically needed to basically set the stage for subdivision approval and to check that all the concepts of the area structure plan have been satisfied. In instances where subdivision is not being proposed, so for instance, a recreational development, which is going to have one large parcel but have many development units located on it, Instead of local area structure plan or an outline plan, they'd be required to do a detailed site plan, which still has to answer many of the same questions that you can see listed for the outline plan. So we still have to know access roads in and out, we still have to know a number of development units, we still have to know proposed land uses, how natural areas will be treated, and how infrastructure will service that development. In both cases, policy 4.10.7 allows the county to identify on an as-needed basis, so there is some customization depending on which area we're talking about, a series of studies to make informed decisions. So this most commonly will include a traffic impact assessment to look at how much traffic will be generated, what roads are likely to be used, and what, if any, upgrades are needed for those roads to function in the long term. It includes a servicing study or design brief to look at how much water is required and whether or not there's ability to provide that water, and similarly, how much wastewater will be created, and what is the game plan for managing that wastewater. The stormwater management plan that we mentioned before is expected. If there's a lot of slopes in a particular area, there may be a requirement for a slope stability assessment. In all cases, there's a requirement to do a biophysical assessment of the flora and fauna and natural features that are found within that particular quarter section, and that requirement flows directly from the Buffalo Lake Intermunicipal Development Plan. Provincial policy requires the assessment of wetlands and a classification of individual wetlands to determine which ones have to be retained and which ones may be replaced subject to the compensation policies. And there may be a requirement for an environmental assessment if the county has reasons to think that a previous use may have contaminated a particular property. Last two on the list, historical resources. And throughout this area, most likely historical resources will have to be assessed for every single subdivision. And if there's a use of a communal water system, the water supply report mentioned earlier would also be required. So all of those support studies are expected to come in at the same time as the outline plan, the site plan, or the local area structure plan to substantiate that the infrastructure can be provided to support the development in the project. Last policy in this particular area indicates that even if the area is already designated and does not need to go through a redesignation, the county can still require the same materials prior to processing a development permit for that use. Okay, so our final section of policies deals with plan administration. So these are things that are necessary to keep the plan current, to help with interpretation, and basically are about managing the plan itself. So the first policy clarifies the meaning of those key terms for the various policies, what must or shall means, what may means, and how to interpret the word should. It also includes an area where if we have not anticipated a scenario, there's an opportunity to come get interpretation from county council about the plan, and that county council decision on that particular interpretation will be deemed as final. The role of the land use bylaw is articulated in this area. It's expected to be the main tool to follow up on development on the land. So for instance, if the outline plan calls for a minimum 0.5 acre parcels, the land use bylaw designation that's put in place should support and be consistent with that. So that means as developments are brought forward, there may be a need to make amendments to the land use bylaw to make that happen. The next is subdivision and development approval policies are expected to follow this area structure plan. They're also expected to follow all plans that are above this plan, including the county's municipal development plan and the Buffalo Lake intermunicipal development plan, and be consistent. So the idea is that the policy directions flow all the way through down to the decision to allow the development to go ahead. Development costs, we talked briefly about that just for the sake of not assigning dollars per se through the plan, but to assign broad expectations or responsibilities. So there's two policies in this particular area. For anything that is considered internal or within a subdivision being created, so the new local road to provide access to that lot that the developer will then sell, those costs are borne completely by the developer and are reflected in lot prices when those are sold. There are other infrastructure in policy 4.11.7 that are beyond outside the boundaries of an area the person may own and is developing that may be shared with other developers. In those particular cases, the county is prepared to negotiate or cover those through various funding tools that they could collect funds from all the property owners that benefit from that particular infrastructure. Finally, plan amendments and minor adjustments. The plan does offer some latitude for adjusting the location of road, adjusting the precise boundaries, but any major changes that are dramatically different than what's allowed or described in those policies may require a formal plan amendment. So for example, if a residential area is going to be switched to recreational use, that would qualify as a reason to amend the plan at the same time that an outline plan or a local area structure plan may be considered that provides a detail about that proposed recreational development. And the last section I'll speak to is plan review. In general, area structure plans do have to be kept current as development and times change and policies and provincial policies and legislation changes. The review period suggested for this plan is at least every 10 years. That said, if council wishes to review their plan at any point in time, that's their prerogative, and they may choose to do one at an earlier point if need be. That concludes our walkthrough of the draft South Shore Area Structure Plan. Thank you very much for taking the time to find out about the plan. If you have comments or questions, please feel free to access the county website or contact the individuals that you'll see on the screen to share your comments or make your inquiries. Thank you again for your attention.